Hello, my name is Jen Chandler, and I am the Director of Elders Climate Action, also known as ECA. I'm honored to be hosting this press conference today. So thank you for joining us to celebrate the Environmental Protection Agency's suite of standards to reduce pollution from fossil fuel-fired power plants, which sets a new carbon pollution standard for existing coal-fired and new gas-fired power plants. I'm pleased to be joined today by Regional Administrator Martha Guzman from EPA's Region 9 office, Arizona State Senator Priya Sundaresan, Dr. Eve Shapiro with Physicians for Social Responsibility, and Paloma Greenwald, RN with Alliance for Nurses for Healthy Environments. Before I introduce our guests, I'd like to first tell you a bit about ECA and why we're here today. At Elders Climate Action, we are working to mobilize elders throughout the United States to address climate change while there is still time to protect the well-being of our grandchildren and future generations. We are dedicated to using the power of our caring, our wisdom, and our numbers to push for strong policies that will reduce greenhouse gases in our atmosphere to a level consistent with life thriving on our planet. Elders have witnessed climate change firsthand and are beginning to understand the consequences of inaction. We know that older generations contributed significantly to the greenhouse gas emissions threatening our planet, and that the cleanup cannot be left to younger generations alone to solve. We have a moral responsibility to ensure a livable planet for our grandchildren and all life for generations to come. We must work across generations, across communities, and across party lines to build the political will to implement solutions. We believe that collective action is the most effective way to force policy changes on the scale and timetable that will be necessary to protect all of us. And as the largest voting bloc in the United States, elders are uniquely positioned to help build the political will necessary to address the climate crisis. That's why at ECA, our members have been working hard to push the EPA to finalize strong solutions to address air pollution. These standards we celebrate today will make significant reductions in carbon pollution that will help close the gap on climate commitments made in the Paris Agreement and by the Biden administration. Until now, power plants have been able to dump carbon pollution without limit. This final standard, together with Inflation Reduction Act, is projected to reduce carbon pollution in the power sector by more than 83% below 2005 levels and more than 74% below 2022 levels by 2040. Strong standards like the Clean Power Plant Standard are critical in protecting the health of our elders, our children, our families, and our communities across Arizona. Here in Arizona, increasing occurrences of extreme heat lead to excessive high pollution advisories on a near daily basis. Additionally, Arizona is in a mega drought experiencing devastating wildfires, massive dust storms, flash flooding, and other extreme weather events. Science has been warning us for decades that greenhouse gas emissions created by the extraction and burning of fossil fuels are driving the climate crisis. Climate change and air pollution are directly impacting people across Arizona and across the country. And these standards will improve the air and help protect all of us. These improvements are happening because of the advocacy from organizations like Elders Climate Action, Alliance for Nurses for Healthy Environments, Physicians for Social Responsibility, Climate Action Campaign, and everyone else out there fighting for clean air. Because we submitted comments and provided testimonials and we're following up with phone calls and emails, we are seeing these changes by the EPA. So a wholehearted thank you to everyone out there who sent messages encouraging bold action. And thank you to the EPA and the Biden administration for setting strong standards to regulate power plant emissions. These improved standards announced last week are a great step for clean air, our health, and protecting future generations. At ECA, we are encouraged to see these critical steps forward to reduce toxic air pollution. However, we know that in order to meet our critical climate commitments, there's still more work to be done to ensure the cleanup of dirty fossil fuel pollution, like setting strong carbon standards for existing gas-fired power plants. We look for working with the EPA to finalize additional rules to safeguard our air. I would now like to introduce EPA Region 9 Administrator, Martha Guzman. Martha is leading the EPA's effort to protect public health and environment for regions spanning Arizona, California, Hawaii, Nevada, US Pacific Island territories, and 148 tribal nations. Her focus is on advancing President Biden and Administrator Regan's priorities in the areas of climate change, environmental justice, and scientific integrity. More broadly, on achieving progress in making air, land, and water cleaner and safer for the residents of the Pacific Southwest. So thank you, Martha, for joining us today.
Thank you, Jen. It's great to be here to really take a moment to celebrate the actions that took place last week. And as you mentioned, in addition to the coal-fired rule, we did have a series of 4 separate rules that I'm going to talk about briefly. And that was really intentional to help reduce the pollution from fossil fuel fired power plants, to protect communities from pollution and improve public health, all while supporting a long-term reliable supply of the electricity needed to power America forward. So the suite of the final rules included the one you described, which was the existing coal-fired and new natural gas-fired power plants. That would ensure that the longest running coal-fired plants and the highly utilized baseload new gas-fired plants will control 90% of their carbon pollution. The second rule was the strengthening and updating of the mercury air toxic standards, known as MATS, for coal-fired power plants, tightening the emission standards for toxic metals by 67%, and finalizing a 70% reduction in the emission standards for mercury from existing fired sources. A final rule was also completed to reduce pollutants from the discharge through wastewater from coal-fired power plants by more than 660 million pounds per year, ensuring cleaner water for affected communities, including communities with environmental justice concerns that are disproportionately impacted. And finally, the fourth rule was to require the safe management of coal ash that is placed in the areas that were unregulated at the federal level until now, including a previously used disposal area that may leak and contaminate groundwater. By announcing these final rules at the same time, EPA was really following through on our boss, Administrator Regan's commitment to the power sector, which he made at CERA Week in 2022, to provide the regulatory certainty as the industry makes these long-term investments in the transition to a clean energy economy. They also reinforce an unprecedented clean energy incentives that the President and Congress have created through legislation like the Inflation Reduction Act. For the carbon pollution standards specifically, the climate and health benefits of this rule substantially outweigh the compliance costs. By 2035 alone, the regulatory impact analysis estimates substantial health co-benefits, including 1,200 avoided premature deaths, 870 avoided hospital and emergency room visits, 1,900 avoided cases of asthma onset, 360,000 avoided cases of asthma symptoms, 48,000 avoided school absent days, and 57,000 lost workdays. These standards are designed to work with the power sector's planning process, providing compliance timelines that enable power companies to plan well in advance, and a reason why we did these comprehensively, so all of these requirements come together. Since the passage of the Clean Air Act in 1970, we've seen key pollutants drop by nearly 78%, while GDP has grown by 304%, demonstrating that environmental protection supports our economic growth. Finalizing these 4 rules delivers on the administration's commitment to health protections for all communities, including communities with environmental justice concerns, many of which are located near these power plants. Okay, and now with that, I have a great honor of introducing our next speaker, the Arizona State Senator from Arizona District 18, Senator Priya Sandarshan. And it's a great to be able to and really present with somebody with such an amazing environmental track record, and not to mention knowledge from all of your degrees in engineering, law, natural resource economics. We're hiring at the EPA, Senator, but you're doing a more important role here with being a ranking member of the Senate Elections and Natural Resources, Energy, and Water Committees. And thank you for your champion voice through all of these changes and the opportunity to work together on implementing these important regulations. Senator.
Thank you so much to our Region 9 administrator for that lovely intro and the potential job offer. Thank you. I'm Senator Priya Sundaration. I represent LD 18 in the Arizona Senate, and I am just here in support and celebration of these new EPA rules. I guess I'll go into a little of my own background because I come to the state Senate from a background of environmental advocacy ever since I really learned about climate change in college and knew that scientists were very clear on what the source of the problem was and what steps needed to be taken in the sense of reducing greenhouse gas emissions in order to mitigate the worst effects of climate change. I knew that climate change was a driving factor in my own career. I studied environmental policy in addition to my engineering degree, and then pursued my law background with a focus on environmental law, and became an environmental advocate before my now position in the state Senate. So climate change and environmental issues have long been important to me, and the knowledge that climate change is occurring, but that the actions that we can take in order to mitigate the worst effects of climate change are in our own hands has really been a driving factor. And, really that's why these actions that the EPA has taken and the rules that have been finalized last week are so critical. The set of 4 rules are so important to see. I'm so glad to see that we are we're regulating and leading to reductions in greenhouse gases from existing coal plants and new gas plants that are going to be built. Here in Arizona, we do have coal plants that still operate, and we have a number of gas plants that will be built. And so these rules are very important in making sure that Arizona continues to source energy and generate energy, but does so in a clean way, one that will not shortchange our future for our present day energy needs. As for my current role, I am ranking member on the Senate Energy, Water, Natural Resources Committee here in Arizona. And we're not yet at the place where we are leading at the state level. The legislature still has some outdated statutes on the books that need to be repealed in terms of greenhouse gas emissions and actions that we can take at the state level. And meanwhile, we're also seeing actions by our utility regulator to deregulate and fail to update our renewable portfolio standards and fail to really incentivize new solar and other renewable deployment. And that's why I'm so thankful that we have multiple layers of government and that our Environmental Protection Agency is that federal level that has come in with these strong standards, drawing upon the strong background of the agency employees and the analysis that's been performed. And so that these rules when in effect, will allow for the state and local partnership with our federal government in order to continue moving in a good transition towards more renewable energy. And I will continue from my vantage point in the state Senate to be advocating for stronger action that will, again, further complement the EPA rules that are being promulgated today. And that just really highlights the importance of the advocacy at all levels of government. Continue to for advocates out there, keep doing what you're doing. It's very important that government officials at all levels hear about the importance of climate change to everyday people because of the impacts on our public health, the impacts on our ability to continue to live sustainably in our environments. And so, you know, continue doing that. And with that, I will turn it over to an incredible advocate who is my own constituent, who I hear from on a regular basis on a number of issues, because I know she's a very plugged in member of our community, but in this context happens to also have a very important knowledge base about the health impacts of climate change and other emissions issues, Dr. Eve Shapiro, and who's a pediatrician.
Right, thank you. So as a pediatrician, I really welcome these regulations to decrease carbon pollution, toxins such as mercury, coal ash, and wastewater pollution. Children are some of the most vulnerable population to the effects of pollution, as well as the elderly. Children, because of their small size, the impact is greater. They also tend to spend more time outside and have the effects of pollution more significantly. And the elderly, because of underlying medical issues, are really more at risk of some of these pollutants. But ultimately, help in these areas will help deal with the major issue of climate change, as the other speakers have already mentioned. And in Arizona, we are at high risk of the heat effects. And just as an example, in Maricopa County over this past year, 645 people's deaths were attributed to the heat. Now, this has been a 700% increase over the past 10 years. That is the most extreme effect of some of the climate change impacts on Arizona. But just generally speaking, climate change affects the health of the population, as I mentioned, children and the elderly, in terms of respiratory diseases. Martha mentioned the risk of asthma and other respiratory illnesses, cardiovascular diseases, particularly for the elderly, and toxins affect brain function as well. So these are all having an impact on the population, and that is why it is so important that we take these measures to control those pollutants. Now, as it's become clearer and clearer of the science of pollution and climate change, many healthcare organizations have joined the fight in improving our environment. Physicians for Social Responsibility has been a leader in this for many, many years. But my own Academy of Pediatrics has now released many statements about the effect of the climate on children, and urging pediatricians to share that information with their families. And I think other healthcare organizations as well. I'm involved with Society for Adolescent Health and Medicine. We work with teens and young adults, and we worked on a position statement for that organization to show the impact on teens. And many of you may be aware that teenagers are getting very involved in the issue of climate change. And in fact, there are several groups around the country that are suing state and federal government on how the climate is going to impact themselves and their future. And so I think that's really important that we're getting the involvement of young people in this work as well. The COP28 had a whole section on the health effects of climate change for the first time. So I think this is really getting to be accepted as a significant impact, and the importance of being very proactive in getting some changes done quickly. So again, the EPA rules are just an incredible advantage, in addition to the Inflation Reduction Act, in making an impact. So now I would urge other health professionals to join some of these groups, Physicians for Social Responsibility. There's also another Arizona group called Arizona Health Professionals for Climate Action. And then there's a national group called the Medical Consortium on Climate and Health. And all those organizations are very actively involved. That last one is a consortium of, I think, over 50 medical organizations to work on this issue. So thanks again. And now it is my pleasure to turn this webinar over to Paloma Greenwald. She is an RN and a public health professional. She has worked in schools internationally and works on policy issues at a local, state, and federal level. So Paloma, thank you.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much, Eve. That was very kind of you. So I very much appreciate the opportunity to participate here today. In my 24 years as a community health nurse, I've observed the very profound impacts that the environment and climate change have on our health and well-being. I'm honored to share a couple of stories and my experiences with you as we celebrate the urgent and historic action taken by the EPA and the Biden administration for rules against carbon pollution. So when I completed my nursing education at Arizona State University, I can clearly remember the home health visits I made for patients with chronic lung disease. I saw maybe 1 or 2 patients a day with these conditions. I then worked as a school nurse and eventually returned to working with seniors with long-term needs. And now in a given week, the number of seniors I see with lung disease has easily tripled. When my alarm goes off in the morning, I don't necessarily reach for social media or email. Instead, I check the apps that describe the air quality and pollen count because I'm planning on protecting my patients from the very air we all breathe. When I observed a pattern of increasing air pollution on the health of seniors, I looked for support from the nursing community to process my experiences. And that's when I discovered the Alliance of Nurses for a Healthy Environment. We also call it ANNE. So I'm very grateful and proud to belong to a nationwide group of talented nurses who understand the relationship between human health and the environment in which we live, work, and play. ANNE promotes nurses into pivotal roles in environmental health because we are indeed the frontline workers that support people suffering with the effects of pollution. ANNE organizes nurses' activities through 4 main initiatives or forums. They are education, practice, research, and policy/advocacy. Now, my favorite forum to engage with is the topic of policy and advocacy. And this combines the previous 3 forums and activates nurses into environmental policy at the state and federal levels. Through ANNE's Policy and Advocacy Forum, I've been able to collaborate with other medical providers by directly speaking to lawmakers. At the Arizona State Capitol, and as well as Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., I take my experiences of caring with seniors to the people who create our public health policy. And I specifically ask that clean air, water, and soil become the policy priorities for our collective health. So when I advocate on the intersection of environmental and human health, I talk about what I see in my patients' homes. For example, I can explain how I care for Hispanic elders in neighborhoods adjacent to industrial work sites in the south side of Phoenix, where the air has a pungent taste and smell. The sky isn't entirely blue, it's actually an off shade of tan. Now, the elders I see in these neighborhoods are frequently short of breath, and they cling to the hope that this oxygen tubing they're attached to will deliver much needed relief. I describe the physical challenges of very hot Phoenix summers. I see seniors in suburban and rural communities struggle with increased heat cycles that cause longer pollination seasons. This increased pollen causes more allergies, more inflammation in already compromised lungs. Their noses don't stop running. Add ozone or soot pollution from increased traffic and lung conditions worsen. Eventually, cardiovascular disease will develop from the strain of poor lung function. I often care for seniors on fixed incomes who struggle to pay their utility bills for cooling their homes. I've entered patients' homes in the morning to find seniors exhausted and dehydrated from nights that never dropped below 90 degrees for days on end. Dehydration is exponentially dangerous to seniors due to the added strain that their multiple medications can have on their kidneys. Extreme heat is a huge burden to our seniors' health and all of our health. Additionally, we know that drought raises the cost of nutritious fresh foods. So the combination of increasing food costs plus medications like expensive inhalers, it's just too much for seniors on fixed incomes to afford. Physical conditions worsen, and then supplemental oxygen is needed. That leads to decreased mobility and exercise becomes nearly impossible. Well, decreased exercise and mobility then leads to metabolic conditions such as diabetes, not to mention increased social isolation. And we all know that social isolation leads to poor mental health. So these examples reveal a direct connection of poor air quality, increased heat, and drought to our worsening health and well-being outcomes. I bring a very simple message. Nurses rely on strong environmental protection policies like the recent EPA rules to assist us in preventing more human suffering. We must remain diligent in urgently enacting these rules so we can all celebrate together a very long and happy life in good health. So on behalf of Annie, I thank you for including my nurse perspective in this important discussion, and I celebrate the EPA and the Biden administration for responding to the very important needs of our seniors and our environment. So next, I'd just like to turn this over to Jen Chandler for some closing comments.
Thank you so much, Paloma. Thank you to all of our speakers, Regional Administrator Guzman, Senator Sundaresan, Dr. Shapiro, Paloma Greenwald for joining us here today, and to all of you for joining us also. I'd like to give my appreciation also to Monty Jones and Hazel Chandler for helping to plan this event. I think we all heard the benefit of these critical air pollution standards on our health and our air. And I really hope that you all will help us celebrate and spread the word about these standards in our community. So please feel free to reach out to myself or Monty Jones if you'd like any additional information. And we'll be sure to send out a follow-up press release, which will include some quotes from our speakers from today's event and the recording shortly. So please watch out for that. And thanks again to everybody for joining. And thanks to the EPA and the Biden administration for stepping forward for our health and our communities and implementing these critical air pollution standards. Thank you.